we are starting one more live stream. Today is Sunday, May the 18th, 3:31 Rio de Janeiro time. If you are watching us, please let me know if image and sound quality are good so I can proceed with our topics as usual. And I apologize, we hadn't scheduled the live streams for a while. We're checking on the dates, but now we have actually four live streams scheduled as we speak. This one and an additional three live streams. We're going to have a live stream on next Wednesday and the Wednesday of the following week. And then we're going to skip 2 Sundays and then we're going to get back on the Sunday live streams. Aaron, good to see you, Aaron. We have Aaron here. I assume Aaron is watching us and everything is fine with the quality of our live stream. There are other friends joining us. So please feel free to share the topics of your interest so we can discuss them live. And in the meantime, I'm going to share some interesting news. We are planning some live streams, if you will, in Rio de Janeiro. We are setting up a new space in addition to our office in downtown. We're going to have like a more real estate oriented office in Leblon, Rio de Janeiro. And in this particular location, we're going to have some real estate streams in which people are going to be able to join if they want. Samil, welcome, Samil. Good to see you over here. So I'm just curious if you are watching us as we speak. Any of you in Rio de Janeiro? You also see Marisa Navas. Boa tarde, Dr. Luciano. Boa tarde, Marisa. So good to see you over here. Good to see you and Ricardo in our live stream. So yes, that's the good news. Uh, Real estate live streams directly from Rio de Janeiro with the participation of some of our friends. We have Ulf. Good to see you over here, Ulf. Ulf is asking, are there potentially any negative consequences of buying a property and not applying for residency? For instance, if the amount is too low, can you still buy a second one later and then apply? Ulf, as of today, yes, you can buy multiple properties. We did have here at the firm several cases in which a person would buy a property, not apply, and down the line they would buy a second property and only then apply for the residency based on real estate investments. So up to now, there is nothing wrong with it. The only heads up of is that immigration laws they change over time. Okay, so chances of the rules remaining the same over the course of a few years, they are usually low, actually, right? Like these regulations, they tend to change over time. One thing I usually emphasize is like the minimum requirement. The minimum requirement, at least as of today, is set up in Brazilian reais, and this amount has been the same since 2018. So if you apply, inflation correction alone into this amount, it should be almost double, right? So as of today, is 1 million reais, and back in 2018, it was 1 million reais. So if the government, let's say, if they realize that the amount is not, basically, as meaningful as it was back 7 years ago, 8 years ago, they could potentially update this amount to 1.8 million reais or maybe 2 million reais, right? So this is something for you to consider, Ulf. But, answering strictly what you asked, there is nothing wrong with not applying for the residency right away. Okay, like I mean, at least as per the regulation, which is still the same one as we had back in 2018. you can apply down the line. All right. So I hope that was helpful. Oof. And okay, another question over here. Uh, how is it going to be the program in Rio de Janeiro, right? So the program is going to be basically, we're going to have some sessions, like in live sessions with people in Rio de Janeiro. And if you ask why Rio de Janeiro, is because Rio de Janeiro is the number one market for the so-called the golden visa or real estate investor visa. And that's why we are setting up this program in Rio de Janeiro. And we're going to have live sessions in which we're going to basically share the knowledge that we have in the field. We're going to probably walk you through the different stages of a real estate acquisition from the real estate investor perspective, of course, like as a foreign citizen. And we're also going to discuss several nuances, such as, like, I mean, how to check the title of the property to make sure that there is not, like any major problems with the title, how to check on the property itself, currency exchange, right? How to send the money to Brazil in a compliant manner, how to proceed with this follow up until you finally receive the new deed with your name in the chain of ownership. So that's pretty much the idea. And naturally, for those of you participating live, you're going to be able to ask questions. And I always think that, questions, they are very helpful because they bring a perspective like from the person who are going to be in this journey, right? Like if I just make up questions and answers, it's going to be from my perspective. And, I've been working in this field for a while, so whatever comes to my mind, it may not represent the actual questions that people would have. Of course, like I know many of the questions that pop up every now and then, but I think it's key that we have a participation from the public for this program to be more interesting and helpful for those participating in the program. And the first session is going to be in the end, towards the end of June, and then we're probably going to have at least one session a month. And again, it's going to be live. Probably, at least at the beginning, there's going to be a limited availability. We're probably going to have, availability for 10 people or something like this. Nabil, could you please explain the process of naturalization to a stable union and how long does it take? Nabil, so in broad lines, nowadays, a stable union, right, which in other countries is known as a common law marriage, right, or a civil union. These are two of the most common names I hear in different legal systems. In the United States, a civil union is pretty common. If we're talking about Texas, there would be a common law marriage. The point is, this is not a traditional marriage in which you go and you marry legally, right? On the other hand, you end up getting in a kind of marriage still. And because of that, the Brazilian government is going to say, you know what? You are entangled to this Brazilian citizen, even if you're not calling this thing a marriage. And therefore, I'm going to extend the possibility of applying for residency in Brazil based on the stable union. Okay. And for the stable union, from the Brazilian immigration perspective, they will prefer a stable union that has been legalized, right? Because a stable union, it can be set up through a deed, meaning that you would go to a registry and record that you are in a civil union, right? So that's one route. The second route is going to be when you don't go anywhere, but you have so many pieces of evidence that you're living together with this other person that because of the number of pieces of evidence, a third party would recognize you being in a stable union. Okay, now here at the firm, we basically work with applicants if they have the legalized stable union, meaning that you have a deed. In this case, we would take you on board and help you apply for the permanent residency, right? And the other option, like the more informal stable union, we don't work with just because we think it's a kind of long shot. You're going to present, a bunch of papers saying, yes, I live with this person, but we never, took the time to have this in a deed. We just think, this is just too much of a long shot, and we don't like to work with cases that we don't really feel comfortable with. Like we don't want to take your money and down the line realize, like, I mean, you don't have a good case and you're not going to get to the residency, right? So going back to the timeline and the overall process, right? So once you have a legalized stable union, you can then apply. First, you're going to apply for permanent residency, okay? You're not going to apply. Many people say, well, how do I get my passport? How do I get, the citizenship? And first thing you're going to get is going to be the permanent residency, right? So that's pretty much for everyone. I know that some countries like Portugal, they kind of extend nationality, even if you're not a permanent resident, not in Brazil. Like there is never in Brazil a route for people to become a Brazilian citizen without first becoming a permanent resident. And I like to say that you don't get a naturalization because you married or because you have a stable union with a Brazilian. Instead, you're going to get citizenship because you happen to be a permanent resident for a certain amount of time, right? And that's exactly the case for the stable union. So, got stable union, you apply for permanent residency. When you get to the permanent residency, if you get to the permanent residency, then you got to live for a full year in Brazil. And once you've been living in Brazil for this full year, then you have a shot at applying for the Brazilian naturalization. Most requirements, they are kind of straightforward. You're going to need to present a background check, from Brazil, potentially from your country of origin, and other things. But the key one is going to be naturally that you are still in the stable union. And then there is a second one, which is usually a challenge for people trying to apply with just 1 year of permanent residency in Brazil, which is the Portuguese language. Okay, so you don't need to speak any Portuguese at all to secure the permanent residency, right? There is no question about your fluency in Portuguese for you to secure permanent residency, but there is a high expectation of your language skills when you are applying for the naturalization, right? And I think it does make sense. You can leave, particularly if you have a Brazilian spouse, a Brazilian partner. You may need or you may want to live in Brazil for several years, and it happens that to learn Portuguese is not exactly easy. So you could live 3, 4, 5, 10 years in Brazil or 20 years in Brazil as a permanent resident. Now, when you apply for naturalization, the understanding of the Brazilian government, or I would say the Brazilian society, is that you are already inserted into the Brazilian society, right? And nowadays, whenever particularly when you see news of like Europe and other countries in which the immigrants, right, like they are not really integrating into the society, but instead they are, isolating themselves in kind of, like separated types of neighborhoods of groups. So I see, this requirement from the Brazilian government with very good eyes because if you speak Portuguese in an advanced type of way, chances are, particularly in Brazil, in which let's say the opportunities for you to interact with other Brazilians is so high, that's going to be very beneficial for the immigrant. All right. So I would say, Nabil, the Portuguese language is probably going to be, the biggest challenge for anyone, not just for you in particular, but for someone to be able to naturalize in just 1 year. Now, I really like when I have, consultations about the subject. Clients, they are always very confident that they can achieve such a level of fluency in just 1 year. And they give me examples. Well, I went to Mexico and in just 1 year, I learned so much. I can have, meaningful conversations and so on. So maybe whenever people are scheduling consultations with us, they are already, people with these language skills because it's very common and often for me to hear from, applicants that they are going to be able to pass a very demanding exam in just 1 year, right? Which is kind of surprising to me. But again, maybe that's just because they are scheduling the consultation and they know about the requirements and they've been preparing or they are good at languages, right? But that's something interesting to share with you guys. Aaron, when buying multiple properties over time for the real estate visa, would all transfers of currency needed to be compliant or only the last one when applying? Aaron, for sure, all of them, okay, all of them. In every single case, we would need to present the currency exchange paperwork, more specifically, the currency exchange contract received from the bank to show that you sent money from abroad, right? And there are many variations of this question. And the bottom line here is the Brazilian government wants to make sure that you're sending the whole amount to Brazil, right? Brazil has a number of requirements for the real estate investment a visa in order to make sure that this is a legit acquisition with fresh money. They don't want a money that is already in the country, right? So a variation of this question is like some people they bought property in the past, but prior to the law or the regulation that was passed in 2018. So let's say if they bought property in 2017, when they bought the property, there was no such regulation. So naturally, this property that they bought is not going to qualify. Okay. And the idea here is that Brazil wants to be fresh money. So if you buy multiple properties, you're going to show the deeds for all of those properties to show that your name is now showing in the chain of ownership. That's the first point. And the second point, you're going to need to prove to the Brazilian government that you did send fresh money to buy, those properties. And the way that Brazil adopts to assess if this is fresh money or not is going to be by asking you for the currency exchange contracts. A currency exchange contract is somewhat standard across the board. So nowadays there are 170 usually between 172 and 175 financial institutions that are allowed to exchange foreign currency into Brazilian reais. Okay, so it's not open to everyone. It's actually a short and selected group of financial entities that are authorized and capable of issuing a Brazilian currency exchange contract that's going to qualify for the real estate investor visa. And then if you bought, like two properties for each of those properties, we would need to show the paperwork supporting the remittances from money coming from abroad into Brazil. All right, Aaron, Nabil, in Brazil, so the person who has certificate from cartório, he's eligible to get the naturalization. Yes, Nabil, if you have the certificate, you're probably talking about the certificate of União Estável, right? That's one requirement, right? So you have the certificate, you have the União Estável. Other requirements apply, like we spoke. First one, to be living in Brazil, like, right? You live in Brazil, you're not elsewhere. When you decide to apply, you also need to be living in Brazil. So it's not for you to just stay 1 year in Brazil and then you fly away and you still try to apply. You need to live in Brazil for 1 year. And when you apply, you still need to be living in Brazil. You need to have like the clean background check naturally, and you also need the advanced level of Portuguese. Nabil is saying, thank you so much for the brief introduction. You're welcome, Nabil. According to your explanation, it seems a person can get their passport in their hand in 1.5 year via stable union if they start from beginning. Yes, remember, Nabil, that after 1 year, you're going to be able to start your application, right? I would say that for the permanent residency, the process usually it does not take long. For most people, they are gonna spend a couple of months, putting the documents together. Usually, our team is gonna take an additional month, to get the application fully compliant and schedule an interview at the Brazilian Federal Police. So the permanent residency is usually very straightforward and not that time consuming. Not exactly the same thing for the naturalization, right? The naturalization, you're going to need to build a file, which could easily take 2 to 3 months. In terms of the language assessment, there are usually two official language tests per year. There are some workarounds that you can use other evidence of fluency in Portuguese instead of the test. But I would say that it could easily take 6 to 9 months for you to start your journey. From the moment you have been in Brazil for a year until you actually get the publication of your citizenship. Okay, that's what comes first. You're not approved or you're not recognized as a Brazilian citizen through the passport, right? Like I know that in other countries, the passport is the more meaningful evidence of a citizenship. Not in Brazil. In Brazil, it's going to be either a birth certificate or a publication by the Brazilian federal government in the Brazilian official newspaper, which in Portuguese we call DOU, or Diário Oficial da União. Okay, right? So there is nothing to do with a passport. Of course, once you achieve the citizenship, then you can apply for a Brazilian passport, if you will. Okay, Nabil. But you should give you an idea about timeline. I would say that a couple of years would be more, I think, reasonable as an estimate. Okay. And like I told you, I'm not sure if my emphasis was good enough, but it looks like people are usually overconfident when it comes to the Brazilian Portuguese language, right? All right, Rony Dio, good to see you, Rony. Boa tarde, Luciano. Boa tarde, Rony. Can you explain what is the advantage of doing the online Utah marriage? Obrigado. Yes, Ronnie, of course. So, uh, to marry in Brazil is particularly challenging because of the sheer number of documents that a registry is going to expect from you. And it's going to depend on the state as well. In Sao Paulo, it's usually you're going to face an average type of challenge. In Rio de Janeiro, usually more challenging than in Sao Paulo. In the northeast of Brazil, it's usually, a hit or a miss. Sometimes, if you find a friendly registry personnel, they can, sometimes kind of, turn a blind eye for some of the requirements, but, most of the time they are going to be very strict with the requirements. So what we saw in the past, Ronnie, I'm going to share more to illustrate why the Utah marriage route is such a big deal. we've seen people who would try in the past, with just to give you an example, like in Rio de Janeiro state, Cabo Frio. Cabo Frio is a city by the coast, is a major destination for foreign citizens. And so we had this client, and he was using our services for other things. And if I'm not mistaken, like his fiancée, she was a Brazilian lawyer, right? Like, so think about it. Like, she was a Brazilian lawyer, and he said, "Well, I spoke with her. We're not going to hire your services because she's a lawyer, right? And she's going to handle the whole marriage thing for us." And I said, "All right, that's just fine. No problem with that." And I know they tried to apply for 4 months. Every time it would be a different document that he would need to provide from his side, of course, not from the Brazilian fiancé side. And eventually, 4 months down the line, because he knew of the Utah route, which I always discuss in our consultations, he said, "You know what? Enough is enough." And he married through the Utah system. Okay, so that's a very clear example of why Utah is such a relevant door for those who are stuck when trying to marry a Brazilian national, right? The Utah marriage route, it works like this. You can engage certain like registries in Utah that are going to offer the opportunity for you to marry in Utah through a video conference. Okay, so neither the U.S. citizen or the Brazilian citizen will have to be in Utah, because in this case that I just mentioned to you, and which is also very common, like the U.S. citizen can enter Brazil and stay, according to the rules of immigration, but the Brazilian does not qualify for a visitor visa, right? For some reason, they try to apply. Sometimes they lie in their application. Sometimes, they don't have strong financials, and then they don't get the tourist visa. And so they're unable to travel to the US to marry in person. So the Utah route is going to be very helpful because you can potentially marry. It does not matter where you are, right? So there was another very interesting case. In this one, uh, I'm not sure the services that he was using at the firm, but I remember this gentleman. He was actually from the UK. Okay, he was from the UK, and the fiancée was a Brazilian that could not travel either to the UK or to the United States. So they married in Utah, and that was surprising to me because and I'm going to be honest with you, like I don't know the details about the Utah route. That's not a service that we provide often because it's not in Brazil. Um, and it was very surprising to me, like there was no one from the United States, right? So the gentleman, he was from the UK, the lady, she was from Brazil, and they did marry in Utah. Right? And that to me was like, the most interesting thing about the Utah route, like you can really get this thing done very easily, particularly if you compare to either Brazil, which is, just by usual standards, full of red tape and bureaucracy. In the United States, pretty easy, just naturally, like the United States, there is no such attachment, like to the registry system that we have in Brazil. But on the other hand, the Brazilian party should be able to travel to the United States. Otherwise, it's not going to work, right? Now, unless you're talking about Utah, because in Utah, you can marry remotely through a video conference, and neither parties need to be in Utah at the time of the marriage, all right? So that's the big thing about the Utah marriage route. All right, Ronnie, I hope that was helpful. Pelo Mundo, good to see you back, Pelo Mundo. Is there an advantage to having a retirement visa compared to a golden visa, which gives you the best stability to live in Brazil? Do you get the same benefits? Pelo mundo, in the past, they would be more comparable. And nowadays, believe it or not, the retirement route is usually better, I would say, because you're gonna, when you apply for the retirement, either visa or residency, right? And just let me make this distinction real quick. If you are applying abroad, meaning you're not physically in Brazil, you're going to get a visa. Now, if you are applying while in Brazil, you never get a visa, you get a residency, okay? You cannot have a visa issued physically in Brazil. And the same thing, you cannot have a residency issued abroad. So that's the distinction. Now, interesting to note that in Brazil, we kind of have like mirror versions, right? So you have the retirement visa and you have the retirement residency, right? You have the digital nomad visa, you have the digital nomad residency, right? So that's just a distinction that I think it's important to make because sometimes, we help people like to get, or sometimes pretty much every week we have a few cases of digital nomad in Brazil and we try to make this distinction because in the past our clients would say, well, they are helping me get a visa, in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, for instance, and then a competitor of ours would say, well, they are lying because you cannot get a visa in Brazil, right? So it's more like a minor distinction, but now we're trying to highlight that just to make sure that there is no confusion. Because yes, you cannot get a visa in Brazil, but you can get the residency, which is pretty much the same thing, at least from the digital nomad perspective, right? But going back, pelo mundo, to the retirement route, if you apply for a retirement visa, you're going to get 2 years of temporary residency in Brazil. And after those 2 years of temporary residency, you are able to convert or to upgrade to the permanent residency, right? So here the timeline is just 2 years for you to secure the permanent residency, and you don't need to buy anything, right? You don't need to buy anything. Now, with the golden visa or real estate investor visa, right? There are different names for this route. You actually get first 4 years of temporary residency, and after those 4 years of temporary residency, that's when you're going to get the permanent residency. Okay, so if you think about, you need to invest, like a substantial sum of money, which is like 150, 170,000 US dollars when you are applying, like in the United States. And if you are applying through the retirement route, then you don't need to buy pretty much anything as long as you qualify. As long as you qualify, there are also requirements naturally for the retirement route. But nowadays, the retirement for those who qualify, it does work better than the golden visa, right? Which is like kind of surprising, particularly if you compare to pretty much any other country. I don't know of any other country in which the retirement track is going to be superior to the golden visa track, right? But that's very typical to Brazil. Brazil has a very strong drive of a kind of like when you think about our constitution, we say it is like the social constitution. Not sure if the social is a clear translation. The social word we have, like in Portuguese, a constituição social, social, right? It means that we emphasize, like to respect the society, like to think about the elderly and this type of concept. So this is well aligned with the Brazilian constitution, and I would say the way that our society thinks about how things should be. Another clear example of this kind of uh, uh, concept is when you're gonna travel in Brazil. You're gonna see that there is a priority boarding, believe it or not, to pretty much half the plane, which kind of defeats the entire purpose of a priority boarding because pretty much half of the half of the passengers, they are going to be priority. But that reflects like this kind of Brazilian PCK, in which we need to defer, or we need to kind of try to help those who need help in Brazil. So there are, believe it or not, about 5 or 6 categories of people who are going to qualify for the priority boarding, right? Naturally, elderly, pregnant women, disabled people. So I told you just 3 of the categories. There are about 6 different categories of people who are going to qualify for the priority boarding. And then every single time I travel in Brazil, and I probably travel, I don't know, like, I mean, as you may imagine, many, many, many times, it's always startling to me because I ask myself, listen, what is the meaning of a priority boarding if half of the plane is priority boarding? It doesn't make much sense, right? That's very typical of Brazil. The concept starts nicely, it starts, with a good purpose. And because, like there is this trend of exaggerating, eventually the whole thing loses its purpose, right? But going back to the retirement route, I think that's the my take on why Brazil is probably one of the only countries in which the retirement track is going to be superior to the golden visa track. All right, Pelo Mundo, I hope that was helpful. Pelo Mundo is also asking, will you pay the same amount of taxes to move your personal items for the golden visa compared to the retirement visa? Pelo mundo, there are no regulations addressing that, okay? Pretty much it's going to be like the Polícia Federal, the Brazilian Federal Police, along with the Brazilian revenue system, they work together whenever you're sending stuff into Brazil. There is no regulation talking about retirement, about investors. There is simply no black law addressing those things, right? What the immigration slash Polícia Federal slash revenue system they are going to be looking at is like whether you are a resident or not. So from this perspective, there's not going to be a difference in terms of which track you are picking, in terms of how much you're going to pay in taxes. I traditionally don't like the idea of sending stuff to Brazil just because I did that before. I saw it happening to other clients. It's again just plagued by bureaucracy, red tape. Super common for you to send a container. Container is never released on time. You will start to pay daily fines. Sometimes I hear, right, like I don't know, I'm just saying, I hear about people saying that they are being asked for a bribe in order to release the container. So, all of those things, they just sound like, too much aggravation and friction and money wasted, right? Like for you to bring stuff from abroad. Now, we do have, some clients who say, listen, money is not an issue. I want to bring stuff, because they have sentimental value. I don't mind if I'm going to be, spending 2x to bring x in terms of goods, right? And in this case I say, you know what, that's absolutely fine. We give them like our contacts for trustworthy transportation and customs brokers to help them with the journey, and that's just fine. But I would guess, pelo mundo, that for most people, to bring stuff from abroad, it does not make much sense. Another approach that it does work well for many people is for them to just bring stuff that they could board in a plane, right? So instead of moving in a single shot, you may be coming to Brazil a few times, and then once you have your resident card, you can show to the Brazilian customs, listen, I'm coming from the United States. I got the residency as a retiree in Brazil, and now I need to bring my stuff. So therefore, I have here 6 huge you know, luggage bags, and even though I'm bringing, I don't know, a couple of Apple computers, a couple of LCDs, a bunch of clothes, a bunch of whatever you're bringing. Usually it works well, right? Usually it works well. But for you to kind of avoid a potential taxation, and then again, I'm just like talking about a few aspects. You don't rely on just this conversation alone. I think you should have very specific advisor for this purpose. But like I mean, usually my recommendation is that you never bring like new stuff because they think you're gonna sell it, and then you just bring this kind of additional stuff after you get the resident card, right? So even if you have a letter showing that you were approved for the retirement visa or for the golden visa, I don't think this alone is going to be enough, for you to convince the customs agent that you are allowed to bring that stuff. But once you have the resident card, particularly if it was issued recently, we never saw a client having, a hard time again, as long as they are not bringing new stuff, right? Like, I mean, if you're bringing a couple of Apple computers, in your bag, I guarantee they are going to tax you, the hell out of it, But if you're just bringing it, it does not matter how expensive your Mac computer is. If it is used, like if it is for personal use, like you're going to be fine. If you're bringing bags of clothes, of small appliances or whatever you want to bring, like you should be fine. All right, Mark. All right, Mark. Good to see you over here. Boa tarde, senhor Luciano. Boa tarde, Mark. To apply for the citizenship after receiving the RNEMA, living here for 1 year and subsequent divorce to a Brazilian. When can I apply? Having three sons with Brazil, U.S. nationality. Yeah. So if you are divorced, Mark, then you no longer have you can no longer apply for citizenship, right, based on the RNM because uh, that door is closed, right, because you divorced. Okay, now um, if you have three sons, you would still qualify for the RNM, right? And there are two routes over there. We never had a case exactly like the one you're sharing here, Mark. If we had your case here at the firm, first we would try to apply for the citizenship, saying, listen, his R&M is based on the marriage, but he also has like Brazilian children, and therefore that's the basis for the application. Okay. Now, the best scenario would be for you to actually apply for the residency based on your Brazilian children. And then after 1 year under that specific, the RNM, for you to apply for the citizenship. Because I guarantee if you apply for the citizenship based on the current RNM, the Brazilian government, they are going to ask you first for a current version of your marriage certificate to make sure that you are married. And not only that, they are going to ask your spouse to provide a letter confirming that you guys are still together, right? So you're not going to be able to present on any of those things. Again, we could make a case, right? And that's why you could want to hire a law firm to make a case that even though you are divorced or you are in the middle of the divorce, you still have the basis first for permanent residency, and second to apply for citizenship, being that you are in Brazil and that you have a Brazilian children, right? Now, the most clean way, Mark, it would be for you to get a new RNM, right? Because the Brazilian immigration traditionally, whenever you divorce, whenever you're no longer living together. So even if you're not divorced, but you're no longer living together, meaning like separated, traditionally you don't qualify anymore for the residency. All right, Mark. Samuel, I am in Brazil now, and I already have a stable unit certificate, applied for the appointment, and got the appointment for federal police in July. Can I travel during this time and come back before date? Samuel, typically not. Okay, typically not. Uh, and there is a distinction. Maybe the reason for your question is because the concept of stopping the clock, whenever you have like an immigration application in the works, but what you have is not an application, you just have an appointment. All right, Samuel. So I would avoid doing so, right? Like, I would just stay in the country, wait for you to go to the appointment, see if you get the RNM. If you get the RNM, you go. You can go back and forth, but not until then, right? Now, if you apply for the digital nomad, particularly if you apply through us, through a provider who knows what they're doing, once they file, you actually get, we can actually issue a letter from the federal government saying that you have an application in the works and that you can leave the country, you can stay in the country, you can return to the country, right? So it's very interesting because if you think about naturally, right, like the stable union or marriage residency, they are so much higher than the digital nomad in terms of importance to the Brazilian society. But those things they don't stop at the clock, right? Like the marriage route, the child birth based route, or the stable union route, they never stop at the clock. It's just because of the nature of the application. The application is done usually. The concept is that the application is done in a single shot whenever you are attending that particular appointment, even though you may be exchanging documents with the Brazilian Federal Police, even though you may have an appointment schedule already, but from a systems perspective, and maybe that's the answer for such interesting aspect, you don't stop at the clock. All right, Samuel. So I would strongly advise you to avoid leaving the country, particularly if you have an issue with number of days that you are allowed to stay in the country. Brazil nowadays, after like the beginning of the Trump administration, they are very attached to their regulations about how many days you can stay in the country. And they just mix up concepts and realities in their heads because the Brazilian problem, particularly because of our president who hates the United States guts, right? Uh, but they mix up stuff, right? Like, so we see Canadians, we see people from other countries facing, a hellish time in Brazil. It shouldn't be like that, right? Like if we have a president who has a problem with the United States, like you would expect for U.S. citizens to have a problem entering Brazil, but we see that is more like across the board. So maybe it's just because immigration globally has been like such a hot topic. And what I can tell you is that like this year, very different from last year. Like I mean, the Brazilian immigration is being super strict on days allowed in the country. For U.S. citizens, it's going to be 180 days. It could be like 90 plus 90. For most Europeans, it's going to be 90 days per semester, right? So for US citizens, 180 days per year. So for US citizens, we say it's an immigration year. And for most Europeans, we're going to say it's an immigration semester. All right. So that's the heads up. Nabil, is there any way to make the whole naturalization process a bit faster to a stable union? No, Nabil, there is no way for you to make this thing faster. I think this is already too fast, to be honest with you. I understand people have a different needs and different priorities, different realities, but I would never recommend anything faster than a couple of years, particularly if you're getting the citizenship, right? It's just like too many moving pieces, like too many things that you need to nail. And I just think it's not a good idea to try to do that faster. Samuel, I have another question. Is it okay after stable union? Can I live in another state of Brazil and my partner is another state? Does it gonna affect my citizenship process as well? I think so, Samuel. I think so. It doesn't sound like a legit stable union. Okay, even though particularly when people are asking for support, particularly when people are like fighting for money under a stable union, which is pretty common, by the way. It's a heads up for you, a warning, if you will. When you are applying for an immigration benefit, the idea here is that maybe you are just like, you're just getting a stable union officialized for benefits in terms of immigration, right? So if you show up with this kind of situation, I think there is a high chance that the immigration would consider um, your stable union not enough to justify residency. I think they would want you guys to be living together. Of course, if you can show, listen, we've been living together for, I don't know, like 5 years. And, just now, my partner is now attending, I don't know, a semester of some type of study in a different state, that could be accepted, but I wouldn't risk, like I would never, to be honest with you, I would never take such a case here at the firm because I just think it's not there is just too much room for problems. All right. Nabil, I heard sometimes they visit your house to investigate if you have a real relation or not. Do they do it during the PR process or when you apply for naturalization? Exactly, Nabil. Thank you for sharing that. You are almost like helping me answer Nabil's question, right? Because yes, very common for the Brazilian Federal Police for them to make like a surprise visit, not very common, but I would say they do that in a certain percentage of the cases. And what if they go over there, they talk to the doorman says, "Well, I never saw this guy with another person. He lives by himself." You know what? Your application is gonna go, it's gonna go under immediately. All right. So that's exactly the case. Now, they usually do that for the permanent residency process. I never saw that happening for the citizenship application. Okay, never saw they doing it. Now, again, there is nowhere in which you can go and check the rules. Like, I mean, this is usually stuff that they have internal to the immigration system, and they naturally do not advertise to avoid people to game the system, right? So what I can tell you, I don't recall any case in which someone secured the citizenship through our firm for which there was a visit from the immigration. But for the permanent residency, that's actually pretty standard. All right. Moses, if I am applying for an investor visa from a country that requires a visa to enter Brazil, while you are processing in Brazil, do I need to be part of the process at the Brazilian embassy in my country? Moses, we never had a case like this, right? Like, I mean, the vast majority of our clients for the investor visa, they are, I would say, 90% from the United States. 10% is going to be like the UK, Australia, Canada, and so on. So if you are from a country that requires a visa to enter Brazil, a traditional visa, right? Because nowadays the United States, Canada, and Australia, they do need a visa, but that's just the e-visa, meaning, the threshold for you to secure the visa is really low. Now, if you're coming from countries in which traditionally the Brazilian immigration is going to be tough, just going to give a few examples, right? Like, I mean, that we see repeatedly here at the firm. Like, I mean, people inquiring, it's going to be like in Nigeria, it's going to be Pakistan, Haiti, and a few other countries. If you are from those countries, like if you try to apply for a regular visa, and if you don't get the visa, I would say it's concerning for a golden visa down the line. But in theory, if you are able to buy a property, let's say remotely, right, and you have all the requirements met, you sent the money in a compliant manner, you got the title, and so on. The first step of applying for the real estate investor visa, it would actually happen first in Brazil. And from Brazil, they would send the paperwork. They would send the paperwork to the embassy or consulate in your country of residency or origin. And I would say you would have a very compelling basis for the Brazilian government to apply your real estate investor visa, right? But to be honest with you, this is just not part of our expertise. All right, Samuel, I have a 3 months visa which is getting expired on July 14th, and I have an appointment at July 9th to apply for the permanent residency. So you are saying it's better for me to stay in Brazil until I go for appointment. Yeah, listen, um, if you have up to July 19th, 14th, right? Like, I mean, even though you're saying that you have the 90 days, what I saw happening before, Samuel, is like this. Whenever you're entering Brazil through the border control, those agents, they are usually outsourced agents. They are not really from the Polícia Federal. And what I saw happening in the past is like they stamp you like 90 days, even though in the system you don't have it the 90 days, right? Let's say if you were from the United States, right? Just for the sake of this example, let's say you've been, traveling in and out for 170 days in a given year. Next time you come to Brazil, you actually have only 10 days. And the, personnel at the border control, they give you a 90-day stamp, okay? In theory, you could stay for those 90 days without an issue because, yes, you have the 90-day stamp. But what if you go back, you travel abroad, and then you try to come back 20 days later? Guess what? They are not going to let you in. Even though they gave you the 90-day visa in your prior entry, you didn't have more than 10 days. And therefore, once you try to enter, the system is going to flag. The system is going to say, listen, this person has been in Brazil for 180 days this year. Do not let this person enter the country. Okay, Samuel. So just because you have a 90-day visa, this visa, once you, it's not a visa, it's actually a stay, right? Like they stamp you a 90-day stay on your passport. So once you leave Brazil, that stamp is over, right? Like, I mean, next time you are re-entering Brazil, they are not going to look at whatever you got last time. They are going to actually look at your number of days in your immigration year, if you go by immigration year, or in your immigration semester, if your country of nationality goes by immigration semester. All right, Samuel. So particularly if you have, such an opportunity to become a permanent resident, our standard recommendation is listen, just wait. Like you're so close to achieve the permanent residency, right? So if there are other concerns in play, which I don't know if it is the case or not, that could also be concerning, Samuel. All right. All right, we have here My Life by Julia. All right, do you have to be in Brazil to apply for the permanent residency in Brazil for foreign nationals through marriage? Yes, Julia, yes, absolutely. Yeah, there is no such a thing as applying for a permanent residency from abroad. Okay, you cannot do that from abroad. And that's one of the reasons why you don't do that systemically. Okay, like there were some of the comments that I shared today that were surrounding this reality, right? When you apply for the digital nomad, you apply through a system that is going to process your application offline, if you will. Okay. That does not happen with the permanent residency. For the permanent residency, that's going to actually occur usually in a single shot once you attend your appointment with the Polícia Federal, right? So if you're not in the country, how can you attend this appointment at the Polícia Federal? Another nuance, Julia, that I recommend, or another approach that I recommend, go to our website, oliveiralawyers.com, and research marriage based residency, okay? And then go to the FAQ, frequent asked questions, and you're going to see different versions of this question answered, in which we make it very clear that you should be actually living. So it's not just a matter of staying in Brazil, Julia. You actually need to live in Brazil. You need to be a resident of Brazil at that point, not legally, but a resident in a sense that you have like an address, like, I mean, you are staying in Brazil at least for the, next several few months. All right, Julia. So I hope that was helpful. I want to say thank you to all of you who participated in our live stream. We have arrived at the end of today's live stream. Our next live stream is going to be on Wednesday. So if you didn't have an opportunity to get a point of interest discussed here live, come back on Wednesday. We're going to have our next live stream is going to be at 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. We're not going to have a live stream on Sunday for the next 2 Sundays. Okay, I'm giving you a heads up, but we're going to keep our live streams on Wednesday. So let me check the dates here. Make sure everyone is crystal clear on the next dates for our live stream. No live stream on the 18th, no live stream. Then yes, live stream on the 21st, which is on the next Wednesday. Sorry, today is the 18th, right? So we have our live stream today. We're not gonna have a live stream on the 25th. We're not gonna have a live stream on Sunday the 1st, but we're gonna have a live stream on May the 21st. We're gonna have a live stream on May the 28th. We're gonna have a live stream on May the 4th, and then we're gonna have a live stream. It's gonna be the next one on a Sunday. Is gonna be on June the 8th. All right. I hope to see you guys over there. If you are in Rio de Janeiro, or if you have a friend in Rio de Janeiro who's interested in real estate, also the good news that we're gonna have a live training sessions in Rio de Janeiro, Leblon. We're gonna have more information about that soon. But that would be an opportunity for you to meet with our team in Rio de Janeiro. This is going to happen in Leblon, right? Not in our main office, which is in Rio de Janeiro downtown. Just because of the nature of the training, of the workshop we're going to be doing in Leblon, in which we're going to have a smaller location, but it's going to be real nice in Leblon, closer to the beach. And I do hope to see some of you over there. So thank you again for participating. If you didn't like our live stream, I'm inviting you to do so. It is helpful for our channel. It is helpful for other people just like you. Hope to see you again next Wednesday, and you have a blessed rest of your day.